Welcome back to the RBR Recap, another special edition precap. I'm Alex Burgos. This for Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano, the biggest women's boxing event in history. Got my man Gabe Rivas with me. He's live from New York. Gabe, how are you?
I'm doing well, eating Dunkin' Donuts and pizza every single day, but I've been working it off on the treadmill at night, so it's okay.
Yeah, you definitely gotta get into that New York pizza. It's like when in Rome, right? You can't let that go by.
Absolutely, man.
Definitely. Well, we got a big one on hand that you're there for, so let's jump right into that one. Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano, 10 2-minute rounds, and we'll talk a little bit about that after and kind of like the opinions swirling around of if women should be fighting 3-minute rounds and if that fight should have been 12 rounds for the championship. But it's an undisputed clash between Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. Let's jump right into, Gabe, what your opinion is on this fight. You who've been there for fight week, what's the vibes? How are you feeling everything? And what are you thinking about this fight?
It's a historic fight for women's boxing. It's the first time that two female fighters are going to headline at Madison Square Garden. It's for the undisputed crown. There's a lot on the line for both fighters. It's about legacy. It's about breaking barriers. It's about making history for women's boxing. So both of them are really pumped up. They're both showing a lot of respect to each other at each event, whether it's the workout or the press conference. And today, obviously, with the weigh-in. So a lot of mutual respect, but they both know what they have to do once they get inside the ring. I think a lot of people are favoring Amanda Serrano because she has a little bit more of a professional style. She's a body puncher. She sits down on her punches. Whereas Katie Taylor, she is an Olympic gold medalist. So she does retain some of those amateur styles and habits. And, we'll see if that's going to affect her positively or negatively, because depending on your opponent, depending if it's a professional style like Amanda Serrano, maybe using a more amateur style against that can actually help you win by a decision or by points. So it's going to be a tough fight, and there are a lot of variables I think we should look over and discuss.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think Katie Taylor being the bigger fighter, Amanda Serrano has obviously moved up and down weight classes, but Taylor has that advantage. She has the amateur background, the pedigree, the gold medal, like you were mentioning. Today on Friday, Serrano is a bit of a betting favorite. She's at a minus 150 and Katie Taylor's at a plus 130. It's really even. It's been even throughout the whole buildup, but it's interesting that, kind of this late money is maybe after the media workout and the interviews and stuff like that, maybe people are seeing a little more in Amanda Serrano and having more faith in betting on her. But when we start to examine things like titles won and, opponents over the course of her career, what can we really gather from that? I mean, she's got, I think, the second most knockouts in women's history. But when you start to look at the level of competition and not downgrading her, downplaying what she's done, when they're talking about 7-division champion, who have those titles been against?
All right. And this is why it's tough to analyze women's boxing, because the records don't say everything and they don't adequately convey how tough it is for women to find fights, find opposition, get consistency in their career. There are a lot of barriers they want to break down, but it's difficult to find opponents. It's difficult to have the same kind of competition as there is in men's boxing, right? You're not having the same number of fighters in each division. Sometimes you have to move up and down in order to find fights and fight for world titles. I think one thing we want to, highlight is that she is a 7-division world champion, the only one to ever do that out of Puerto Rico, especially. And but 5 of those belts were for vacant titles against who? All right. Against who? So at 126, 122, 118, 140, 115, those were for vacant titles. And, there's nothing, men fight for vacant titles as well. But I think the conventional wisdom in boxing is that when you win a world title, it's a lot more impressive if you defeat a reigning champion.
And some people will say, like, when you beat the champion, you're the champion. When you win a vacant title, you're a title holder. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
Right, exactly. But, her recent wins have been very impressive. Miriam Gutierrez, Yamilet Mercado, Daniela Bermudez, recent wins against fighters who have winning records. Now, those weren't champions. She was making defenses, but you can say that those victories, which are recent from like 2020, 2021, were more valuable than some of those fights where she fought for vacant titles, because these are a lot stronger, a lot tougher, and fighters with winning records. And it was most recent. It reflects some of her recent wins, where she is right now in her career. So it's one thing to fight for vacant titles a few years ago, but recently to have this top opposition fighting on those Jake Paul undercards, that says a lot about where she is right now.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to downplay what she's done. I mean, she also obviously helped women's boxing in general, for this platform to grow, and for fighters like Michaela Mayer and Clarissa Shields and all those, that also have helped the platform just rise and become such a bigger entity. But she's definitely been a big part of that, along with some of the other names that I mentioned. And so I think it's awesome to see them get their headlining moment here at MSG, the Mecca of boxing. And also got to just quick shout out to the co-main, a big fighter, one of the undercard fights in Franchon Cruz DAZN, an undisputed matchup against Ellen Sederuz. All the belts, at 168, that's going to crown a champion and let us know who's the best there. And Gabe, I know you love that, when it's all the belts on the line, championship fights, it just makes it very clear and to the point who is the best in that division. And so that's what we're getting with Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. So we could dance around all these subjects all day, but we're actually going to see the fight. And I think we've mentioned in previous episodes as well, the men can take a page out of the women's playbook. It's like, just get in there and fight.
Yeah, fight the best. And it's a credit. I mean, you mentioned Heather Hardy. It's a credit to Amanda Serrano and her record that she defeated Heather Hardy for a title, and it took her undefeated record. She was 20-0 at the time. So that speaks volumes about her recent opposition. I'm speaking of Amanda Serrano, and I join you in the shout out to Franchon Cruz DAZN. She's a friend of the show, and she's going to be fighting for an undisputed title. Like you said, let's take a page. Men need to take a page from women's boxing and start fighting for undisputed titles, start putting these belts together, start being as hungry for the opportunities, you know what I mean, as the women are. And to go back to a little bit to the analysis of the fight, Amanda Serrano does have slight height advantage. She's 5'5", whereas Katie Taylor is 5'5". She doesn't have a reach advantage. Katie Taylor has a half-inch reach advantage. I don't think the age is going to be a factor. Katie Taylor is 35, whereas Amanda Serrano is 33. The knockout ratio for Amanda is 70%, but you got to put an asterisk because, again, too, right? And Katie Taylor is a 30% knockout ratio. But what does that say for someone who's kind of a slick boxer who doesn't really look for the knockout? You know what I mean? So all these different numbers and all these different things produce an interesting fight stylistically, and especially because of the historical ramifications of the fight.
Right. And I want to mention real quick, Jake Paul spoke to this, and, everyone cringes when I say Jake Paul, but he manages, Amanda Serrano. And so they asked him about the 3-minute rounds, 12 3-minute rounds for this fight. And he said, Amanda Serrano was down. Katie Taylor, when put on the spot at the initial press conference in the UK, was like, I don't think we need that. And I don't know why she feels that way. She was kind of just like, I think we've gotten here to this point with the 2-minute rounds. This event is as big as it needs to be. Serrano was just like, okay, she kind of took her foot off that pedal, but she was definitely down to do the 12 3-minute rounds. And I mentioned that because in women's boxing, for those that aren't familiar, you're going to get 2-minute rounds, 10 2-minute rounds. And so the action has to happen quicker. And then when we're talking about what type of fight this is going to be,
favors Katie. It favors Katie. That's the Olympic style. She needs quick. And if you're a body puncher like Amanda Serrano, and you're looking to set your feet and land shots, by the time you catch a rhythm, it's 1 minute and 30 seconds have gone by, and you finally land a good shot. It's probably 10 seconds left. You might hurt her, and then the bell rings, and you can't knock her out. You know
right.
What I mean?
So we've seen Katie in kind of both of those styles where she's, on the back foot a little bit more boxing, but will she try to impose her size, not height, but like her size advantage, having fought at the higher weight class. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting what kind of stylistically, what we get, just because of that added caveat, which you don't see in men's boxing, of the shorter rounds. And what am I doing to impress the judges in a shorter amount of time?
Like some people say about amateur boxing, it's a glorified street fight because it's really quick and you're just trying to land shots.
Also on Saturday, we have a huge matchup on the other side of the country in Las Vegas between Oscar Valdez and Shakur Stevenson, a title unification bout. Stevenson, obviously the WBO champion after having beaten Jamel Herring by stoppage, and Oscar Valdez, who brutally knocked out Miguel Burchelt to win the WBC title. They're now coming together to try to unify this division one step at a time. And so this is probably the best matchup that can happen in that division, one of the best matchups in boxing. Gabe, I'm going to kick it right to you. What do you see between Valdez and Stevenson? Is it as clear cut as maybe the odds makers are making it seem? Now on Friday, we have Stevenson as a minus 800. Oscar Valdez is a plus 550. Odds are really in the favor of Shakur Stevenson. Do you agree with that?
As you mentioned, Shakur Stevenson, according to the odds makers, is a heavy favorite in this fight, and for various reasons, right? He's, aside from the 17-0 record with 9 KOs, he's a southpaw. He's 24 years old as compared to Valdez, who's 31. He's 5'7", whereas Valdez is 5'5.5". He also has a reach advantage, 68, as when compared to Valdez, who has 66. He doesn't have a significant knockout ratio, but everything else makes for a very difficult fight because of the style that Shakur has. He's a boxer. He's intelligent. He's very difficult to hit. He's a former champion at featherweight, the WBO title. Now he's a champion in the WBO, and he has some serious significant wins. Christopher Diaz, Joet Gonzalez, who was undefeated. He took the title away from Jamel Herring at 130 pounds. And of course, I think a victory that is aging like fine wine, Jeremiah Nakatila, who he rightfully boxed, and then later Burchelt found out why he boxed him, because he's a real hard hitter. So he has already a really good resume at 126 and at 130. With Valdez, a lot of things are working against him. And you mentioned that he says that, he knows that. He knows that the odds makers are against him. He knows that everyone is betting against him. He is older, he's shorter, he has a lesser, his reach is shorter than Shakur Stevenson's is, but he does have a 76% knockout ratio. He is a hard hitter, and he has already demonstrated that when things are stacked against him, he can perform. I didn't have him. I mean, I'm a big Oscar Valdez fan, but I don't think you nor I had him as a favorite going into the Burchelt fight,
right,
because he's
not
so
at all
big and strong. But look what he did. He outclassed them, and then he knocked them out. And he also has some significant wins on his record. Scott Quigg, Miguel Burchelt, obviously, and Robinson Conceicao. But the Conceicao fight was very close. The Scott Quigg fight, Scott Quigg was at the tail end of his career, moving up from, I believe, 122 to fight at 126. And then Valdez's jaw got broken in that fight. It was a slugfest. It was a war. I think that was one of the catalysts that inspired his management team to say, you know what, we maybe need to look towards, finding him another trainer. And that's how Eddie Reynoso became part of the Oscar Valdez team in 2018. And we've seen how Valdez has improved so much by working with Eddie Reynoso, becoming a little bit more of a counterpuncher, more defensive minded. Eddie never wanted to change his style. He just wanted to improve it and make sure that he was able to take advantage of his natural capabilities. And that's what he's done. And he's looked spectacular. But like the Conceicao fight shows, when he fights a boxer, he is going to run into some difficulties. So I think Stevenson, rightfully so, is the favorite, but I'm never going to count Oscar Valdez out.
Yeah, it's hard to count him out just because we've seen time and time again, he fought with the broken jaw that you mentioned against Scott Quigg. It's not like he gave up or the fight was, no, he kept fighting, won that fight legitimately, knocked Burchelt out when the odds, the deck was stacked against him. And then in this fight, we're now looking again. It's like, okay, well, how does Valdez even win this fight? But I think when we're looking at it objectively, we got to look at not only the physical, tangible things that you can measure, like you were saying, it's just that boxing IQ that Shakur Stevenson possesses. It's Terrence Crawford-esque, and that's like his mentor, whereas Canelo is Valdez's in that camp. But when you look at the things that Shakur can do in the ring, he's smart enough to adjust and to fight the style of fight that he needs to win. You mentioned Jeremiah Nakatila, getting all the boos and all the, people heckling him. Oh, why didn't you stop him or take him out? I mean, it was with good reason that he fought that style. And so against Valdez, I'm trying to think, what could Oscar do to win this fight? If he wants to take a little bit more of a box first approach, Shakur is going to, keep him on the outside and box him all day. He's fine with doing that. He's fine with doing that. He's going to win a comfortable one-sided decision. If Valdez decides to come forward and try to engage more, Shakur is going to counter him to death. And he may even put the pedal to the metal and really sit down on his punches and could potentially even stop Valdez.
Absolutely.
You know, and we've seen him get marked up. You know, Conceição took some spots off and so maybe didn't put so much pressure on, but I think if he would have, it could have been even closer. I mean, a lot of people thought he won that fight, rightfully so. So I think, you know, depending on the style, you still have questions of, can Oscar Valdez do that well enough to beat Shakur Stevenson? I think the answer is no, and I think that's why the odds are so big. Now, this fight is really exciting, though, because there's that X factor. It's like, you never know. He lands one punch, you know, he may show another wrinkle in his game, which I think is what we saw in the Burchell fight. We were like, wow, yeah, I didn't know he could do that so well. I didn't know, you know, he could consistently do that throughout the fight. Then came the knockout. And so if he's able to maybe invest in the body, slow Shakur down, make him feel that power early on, then it kind of changes the dynamic. But that'll be really surprising for me. I think Shakur wins this handedly.
Yeah, with Oscar Valdez, in the final press conference, they asked him, you know, what kind of fight are you prepared to do? And he says, look, I can go in there bang, and I can go in there and box. And Shakur kind of said, nah, that's BS. We know what we're going to see. If we're going to see the same Oscar Valdez who comes in throwing hooks and applying pressure. Is Shakur Stevenson right? Perhaps, but I think that with Valdez, we know what he has to do. He has to come in, close the distance. I don't think he can start this as a boxing match. I think
that's the thing. Yeah, imagine if he does. I mean, you're going to lose 12 rounds.
Exactly. He has to go in and he has to throw punches and he has to work the body and all that. All the things that we know a come forward fighter has to do. However, with Eddie Reynoso, I think he's learned some new tricks that are going to diversify the way he's going to cut the distance and attack the body. For instance, there's a video that Top Rank posted of Canelo in backstage after the Conceição fight, and Canelo was telling him, look, you know, you didn't do the things you worked on in the gym. He said, no cambiaste. It means you didn't change levels. And what I've seen them do in the gym and in Canelo's fight is that sometimes he'll feint with a punch to the head and throw to the body, or he'll feint to the body and go to the head. I think that Valdez is going to show new elements of his game plan, not only being the aggressor, but countering as he comes forward and changing levels and feinting to the top, but going to the body and vice versa. And that's what he has to do to win. And again, you know, the odds makers have Shakur as a favorite, but I wouldn't bet my house or on this fight, because you might end up homeless if Valdez lands a punch and ends the fight.
Right. You might end up like the Rolly fight. He said, bet your house. I'm not betting my house on either one of those fights. But speaking of the feint to the body and coming up top, I always think of the James Kirkland fight with Canelo. How Canelo finished that, man. He just feinted with the jab to the body. You know, Kirkland at that point was just falling for anything, but he just like went down low and boom, came over the top and just sent him into another stratosphere.
Right.
So yeah, it remains to be seen how well Valdez can do with some of those new nuances and tricks that he's learned under the Eddie Reynoso stable. It'll be exciting and definitely a must-see TV, must-see fight for this weekend. So 2 action-packed fights. We'll be back, of course, on Sunday with an RBR recap. Looking forward to the fights and some breakdown on post-fight stuff with you, Gabe. And then, of course, we'll have a few precap episodes as we build in and look forward to the Canelo Alvarez Dimitri Bivol fight.
Thank you for listening to the RBR Recap. Make sure to follow us on social media at RBR Recap and visit RBRRecap.com for the latest episode.